How much of that do you think is to do with them having the wrong image of God? You quote this Zen teaching, pointing at the moon. The finger that points at the moon is not the moon. What does that mean?
I don't know. You tell me, man. I don't know. Oh, did I write that? I have a chapter in the book called The Notorious God. And I love this conversation. I love a conversation about God. I don't love an old-fashioned YouTube debate about whether God exists or not.
You kind of open the chapter by talking about how useless and fruitless YouTube religion debates are.
Yes. It's
I wasn't going to mention that, but
well, I know I think it used to be your bread and butter, but I greatly admire how you've expanded your vision to just have just big, meaty, beautiful conversations and challenging conversations too, as one should. And I hope you'll challenge me as well. But just having Richard Dawkins versus some priest and them fighting it out. And, there's a lot of kind of angry 23-year-olds at home going, oh, you landed a good point there. Oh, yeah, you got him, Dawkins. It's kind of like Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
And it doesn't really change the atmosphere. But I do think, so the finger pointing at the moon. So
I think people often confuse. So when I read that in your book, I thought of this. I keep quoting this poem by C.S. Lewis, and there's a point where he says, "Thoughts are but coins. Let me not trust instead of thee, their thin-worn image of thy head." It's like people often worship their thoughts more than they worship the thing that their thoughts are supposed to be directed to. And so you end up with these ideas of God and these pictures in your head. And
isn't it Wittgenstein who talks about the fishbowl? I don't have the quote right on the tip of my fingers. Something about like how fly glass were caught, like flies caught in a glass, and the glass is the limitations of our language to be able to summate stuff that is, beyond the beyond.
Yeah.
And we're stuck like flies popping around in this fly glass because our language is so limited to try and encapsulate something that is kind of beyond our current consciousness' understanding.
It's impossible to comprehend just how much our language restricts our thinking. I only speak one language fluently, semi-fluently, I like to think. I think it was Goethe who said of language, "He who knows one knows none." Because without this comparison, it's difficult to even recognize the constraints that you have in your language. I did a podcast recently with a guy who's got a channel called Magnify, and he was talking about how the English language, for example, is embedded with sort of accounting terms. It's very sort of trade based because that was the society that this language evolves in. And so when you apply it to religion, it's Jesus accounting, for sins, and we're in spiritual debt and these kinds of language.
Oh, interesting.
Look at the way that religious language is completely embedded into the Arabic language. Totally understandable.
And the original word for sin was an ancient Greek term of archery. Did you know this?
Oh, like missing.
So sin is missing the mark.
Missing the mark.
Yeah, like you're doing this and like, oh, I sinned. I didn't hit the bullseye. So sin isn't like this black mark on your soul that's going to damn you to hell for eternity. It's you missed the mark. And guess what? That's what we do all the time as human beings, is we miss the mark. But again, and then that language got translated. When it got translated into Latin or whatever it was, it got translated kind of misappropriated.
Yeah, as so often happens. I think the history of translation, especially in religion, is something that needs a bit more focus, because so much of our understanding of theology can be affected by one person's decision to make. Have you ever seen paintings of Moses with horns?
No.
A lot of the time, if you see a painting so Michelangelo's famous statue of Moses has horns on it.
Whoa.
If you go to the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, you see on the windows there are pictures of Moses with horns on
Wow.
it. And it's because there's this word, I think it's keren, in Hebrew, which can be translated as like rays, as in like rays of light, but it can also be translated as horns. It's like the same word. So when St. Jerome makes the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible, he translates it literally as horns. So there's this passage in Exodus where Moses comes down from the mountain and he did not know that his head was keren because he'd been speaking with the Lord. So he did not know that his face shone, is how most translations will have it. But Jerome translates it as he did not know that his face was horned because he'd been speaking with the Lord, which doesn't make much sense because like 5 minutes later, he has to cover up his face because of the effect it's having on people around him. It's quite clear that that's what it meant. But because Jerome translated it as horns, you end up seeing all this religious art with
that's fascinating.
Moses having these devilish looking horns.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's quite a sort of trivial example, but you can imagine that happening theologically. It's not just like the painting of Moses, but your conception of God is completely altered by the fact that some concept has been translated wrong. And sin is a great example of that. I mean, shifting your perspective on sin from being this punch that you've landed on God, or this wrong that you've committed that you can sort of do an evil giggle and it's God who's kind of upset about it, to rather being it's you missing the mark for yourself, can transform the way that you interact with the world.
Yeah.
Just by that one word, I think.
Yeah. There's one of my favorite stories from the Baha'i faith is the son of the founder, Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha. He came to the United States a little over 100 years ago and toured around for about a year. And when he landed, and he was on the front page of the papers, like the Persian prophet has landed, and they have pictures of him. He's got a big beard and a turban and stuff like that. And this journalist said, Abdul Baha, do Baha'is believe in Satan? And Abdul Baha thought about it, and Abdul Baha was like, yes. And they said, oh, how do Baha'is view Satan? And Abdul Baha said, Satan is the insistent self. And I love that so much because obviously Baha'is don't believe that there's a red devil man with scales and a pitchfork in an evil place, like trying to tempt us. But when you think about the insistent self, and you think about the universality of religious faith and religious belief, the ego and the allure of the ego of lust and passion and power is hardwired into our DNA, as well it should be, because we are part ape, we're part animal, maybe we're mostly animal, and that's how
yourself.
That's how we survived, was to have our own self-interest, to spread our seed, to seek power, protect ourselves. But that is the ego. That is so much of what Buddhism is about the need, the clutching, the need to possess, that this is a source of great unhappiness. So this idea that Satan is not something outside of ourselves, but something in ourselves, and it's not an evil power, but in fact something that we all wrestle with. It speaks to every spiritual tradition.
Who was it? Baha'u'llah's
Abdul Baha.
Abdul Baha. There's a quote from Abdul Baha on your book.
Okay,
page 98 for those following along at home. People have pictured a god in the realm of the mind, and worship that image which they have made for themselves. Consider then how all the peoples of the world are bowing the knee to a fancy of their own contriving, how they have created a creator within their own minds, and they call it the fashioner of all that is. It's people worshipping their thoughts rather than worshipping the thing that their thoughts are supposed to point to.
Yeah.
I think that, so Thomas Aquinas famously thought that all religious language was analogy. And so God is not powerful. God is not knowing. God is not, any of these things, because these are human concepts that we used to sort of analogously think about the way that God kind of operates. But he's obviously not powerful in the way that a human is powerful, being able to lift heavy things and influence people and stuff like that. It's a totally incomprehensible notion, but we use these analogous terms. But now, if you ask the philosophers even, how do you define God? They'll say, oh, he's an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing, and perhaps
that's the finger pointing at the moon.
Yeah, pointing at the thinking about the finger, the pointing at the finger itself, which is probably the wrong way of thinking about it. I think a lot of David Bentley Hart seems like someone that you've read.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure that one of his biggest critiques of the new atheism movement is that they're just thinking of the wrong kind of God. They've just got the wrong picture of what God is supposed to be. I mean, what do you think God is supposed to be?
Well, that's the ultimate question, isn't it? Well, yeah, because you could go even further than that, and you can say that to exist is a quality of the physical world. You know, this pen exists. Does God exist? Does God have the same quality that this pen has?
Right.
You know, you can't say that God exists. But again, that's how trapped we are by language.
By language, yeah.
So, yeah, I love David Bentley Hart. The Experience of God. His book is a seminal book for me, and that really illumined a new way of thinking about God. And I have a chapter in there I referenced before, The Notorious God, and I'm actually doing a documentary. I'm going to start next year doing a documentary called The Notorious God. I'd love to interview you for it.
Sounds
great.
Are
you up for that?
That sounds like great fun.
Okay. But this idea that God is much closer to an experience than a being with superpowers.
Yeah.
So Jesus said God is love. And the hippies were right in a way. Like, can God be closer to something more akin to music than to a dude? You know, David Bentley Hart calls him like a demiurge. That's this old idea of like a god with superpowers on a cloud, like striking you and giving you favors and like and having opinions and whatnot. Can God be closer to physics and beauty than to any kind of being? You know, that's what so many people are striving to understand through psychedelics. You know, I'm not a huge fan, but I'm also an addict, so I can't do them. So maybe if I wasn't, I'd enjoy them. Who knows? But that reaching for something beyond, again, that reaching for something transcendent. And when I experience God the most, I experience God in nature. I experience God. I think the closest I've ever come to God was at a Radiohead concert. And I saw Radiohead at the Hollywood Bowl, and song after song after song from In Rainbows came up. And I was just like, my face was melting, and I felt one with the world. And I just felt love and ebullience and joy. And I was just absolutely mesmerized and transformed. And I was like, this is like the most religious experience I've ever had.
If you enjoyed that clip, you can watch the full episode with Rainn Wilson by clicking the link on your screen. To support the show and get early ad-free access to episodes, subscribe to my Substack at alexoconnor.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.